Yo, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the newest episode of the Pixelists, the podcast where we like to talk about all the nerdy things we enjoy. I'm Will. That's Blake. Together, we make the Pixelists, kind of like Captain America. Wait, Captain Planet.
Captain Planet.
Let's start over. But
I didn't know if the reference was going to be, I didn't know if we were going to go like more tangible reference or if we were going to be like, we're the Gohan and Trunks to, your fusion. And the people would be like, wait. There'd be that one person who'd be like, I know that reference.
That would actually be kind of a clever, because the Goten and Trunks, because Laura Bailey voiced Kid Trunks. And so there would be like layers to that. But no, I knew Captain America was wrong before I even said it, but I couldn't stop.
Yeah,
anyway,
this
has become a weird intro, but hello. How are you doing today, man?
I'm good. I got my coffee. It's bright and early on a Monday morning. I'm very proud of us for recording this episode not on a Thursday. Feels like we're getting back on schedule. Naturally, I'm sure next week we'll record on Thursday and be like, nope, we
tried.
Yeah, but hello and hello to all you guys who are watching. Thanks for checking out our channel. We so appreciate it. Hope you're enjoying your coffee or whatever you're drinking right now. My man Will, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good, man. I'm excited to talk Critical Role. I'm excited. We don't have an episode this week, but I'm really excited for this week's Critical Role because it's the episode with Stephen Colbert that Matt is DMing. And come to find out, a few of the cast is going to be there as well. So I think that'll be really fun. And, maybe this inches us a step closer to Colbert maybe appearing on Critical Role, which would be crazy.
Oh my gosh, that'd be insane. I was just talking to someone about this the other day. We were talking, it was our D&D table that my group does. And for those who haven't followed the podcast when I've mentioned it, it's a table of 7 people and everyone's brand new to D&D except for one person. And so I was talking with that guy and then some other people this last session. And people were like, yeah, it feels like D&D's popping up more and more. And then my buddy was like, yeah, like now D&D is like at its cultural height right now of people knowing about it, talking about it. And so I think Stephen Colbert could be an additional like inch towards, I don't want to say mainstream adoption. It's already adopted, but I guess there was such a stigma for so long about it, like it being like a more normal thing. It's kind of like esports, like when esports was on ESPN and people were like, what is this?
Yeah.
That's kind of the same vein I think of it as.
Yeah, I agree. And definitely Colbert's a big
personality.
Yeah, like a lot of exposure as well. I remember, Joe, I always mispronounce his name, Joe Manganiello. Do you know what I'm talking about? Super buff, ripped guy. He's married to Sofia Vergara. He was
I'm 0 for 2 now.
He was in True Blood. Did you ever watch that show?
0 for 3.
And then you're not gonna get this one probably because it was like a cameo role, but he was in the
got that one.
He was in the Justice League. Did you see that movie?
Nope.
He was gonna be Deathstroke. That Batman DC villain.
No, sorry.
Anyway, he's
like all things nerdy except for.
Wait, did you see
stuff.
Magic Mike?
Nope.
Okay. You should Google him later. He's like stereotypical, like you'd think he was a bodybuilder, like absolutely shredded, like 10 on the 10 handsome scale.
I've never before seen this person in my life.
Well, anyway, big, he's an actor and he's a huge D&D nerd. Again, married to Sofia Vergara, if you know who that is. She's like a Victoria's Secret supermodel. She's in Modern Family. She's the grandpa's wife, a hot young wife.
Yeah. Right. Okay, cool.
So he's married to her. Anyway, this long story short, he's like a super D&D nerd. He actually guested on Critical Role during campaign 1. Where was I even going with this? Oh yeah, he was on Colbert one time and they talked D&D and that was really fun. But anyway, so yeah, Colbert kind of already is, I'm not going to say carrying the torch for D&D, but he's kind of the mainstream nerd.
Oh, I've seen him before. He's Arkin the Cruel.
Yeah.
I've
That was
seen some
from Critical
clips.
Role.
I've seen some clips with him.
Okay, yeah.
Not really knowing much what was going on, but just a couple of clips with him at the table.
Yeah. Definitely don't
Yeah.
watch those again.
I did see one really
If you're
huge
gonna
spoiler, and I was like, "Oh, why am I on this YouTube video?" But you know
Yeah.
me, I
I'm
can't help
assuming I
myself.
know what the spoiler was if it was
Yeah,
involving him, but yeah.
just going to say it was at the end of the campaign. So
Yeah.
yeah.
uh
Anyway,
but yeah, so that was a very long anecdote, but basically, yeah, Colbert, big
all that
could
to say, Stephen Colbert.
and
Oh.
kind of on that note, so there's no episode proper next week. So I was gonna run this by you. Maybe we do EXU this next week. That 2-part special. We could
That'd be great.
discuss
The
that.
only we have to stop saying we're going to do something. By the way, we just need to drop it on our subscribers and be like, here it is.
Yeah.
The only thing about EXU is, so I've mentioned this for our listeners. My wife had never done D&D before. She's part of my campaign now, but that came after watching EXU with me, and so we watched all of EXU together. All that to say, I watched the first half of the first one, and then I let her know. I was like, yeah, that was awesome. And she was like, oh, hang on. Like, we got to watch this together, just like we did the previous ones. So the only caveat being we do need to watch that together.
Yeah, that's fair.
And we have children that are all over the place. So tentatively, yes.
Okay. Well, we'll get to it at some point. And since we effectively have, even to get it in this window, it's like we have like 2 weeks. So
yeah,
you know, because we could even do it Thursday.
I want to do that. I want to do our summary of the 20 episodes, and I want to do our favorite fan theories, because that's when I've been reading, being like, oh, I really like that theory. And they keep coming. I mean, our listeners keep dropping really cool ideas and thoughts, and so
and perhaps most importantly, Witcher season 2.
Oh my gosh,
that
wasn't gonna bring it back
coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, we're gonna have to find like a summary by the time we record it. What happened in the show?
I already would need one.
All I remember is the planes colliding or something. I can't remember.
I thought you meant like airplanes. I was like, what are you talking about?
Like the demon plane and like the earth plane. Or something.
The conjunction of the spheres.
Yes, the conjunction. Thank you. The spheres. Right.
Which oddly enough, that's
your roots, guys.
That's kind of what's maybe happening in Critical Role. So that's kind of a weird coincidence.
Yeah, that's actually very true. It's funny you say that. So speaking of Critical Role, we've really rambled for a while now, and people who are here for the first time are like, "What is this channel?" Let's get into talking about Critical Role. This episode. This was 20, right?
21.
Just kidding. Episode 21. What we typically do, guys, when we talk about Critical Role, is we do a brief recap. Typically, these are 4-hour episodes, and so our recap's about 15 to 20 minutes. We talk about, hey, this is what happened. These were the big points that happened. And then in about 15 minutes from now, we do a full breakdown reaction. So if you're checking out just the YouTube video, that's only the replay discussion or the summary of what happened. In the link below, there's a link to the entire video, and you can check that out as well. But Will, why don't you kick us off on what happened in episode 21 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role?
Absolutely. So we pick up with the party basically launching into this encounter with these clay golems that sprang up around the earring, potentially this final line of defense. However, one thing of note is that Ashley Johnson is absent this week. We are told that she has asymptomatic COVID. So Laura actually will be playing Fern. So everyone rolls initiative and basically combat begins. But first things first, Orem is still like trying to get this earring. So he focuses on attacking the case, which they had started to do in the previous episode. Excuse me. But he's still not making very much progress at all. So Laudna takes the rock chisel out of her hair and runs up and plants it into like this small crack that has formed in the case. And basically it's like, Ashton, like hit my chisel to kind of hopefully split this thing wide open. So Ashton runs up, smacks it twice. And it basically does like slam the rock chisel in and kind of break open the case a bit. Like it finally kind of shows some damage. And they're like, okay, we're finally getting somewhere. And Laudna actually had to hold that in place while Ashton did that. So once that was finished, she kind of tries to scurry away, and these golems now take their reactions to have opportunity attacks on her, and they just pummel her. I think,
Obliterate her.
yeah, Matt describes it as like her getting like flung across the room, like skidding across the floor, and she actually falls unconscious. So these things definitely are, no walk in the park.
It was like 40 or 50 or more points. I think they each hit for like 20 points of damage
Yeah.
each. They both got double swings. So it was pretty insane.
It was brutal. So Fern, again, played by played by Laura this session, cures wounds on Laudna to get her back up, and she summons Mister and kind of is positioning him in different parts of the room. Chetney, however, uses his attacks to finish smashing the case, and he grabs the earring and the rock chisel and is like, let's get the hell out of here. So Imogen uses command and tells the golems to grovel, and both actually fail their saves, which they have advantage. So this was pretty crazy. And they both basically bow before her, causing them to be like functionally prone for the next round. So because of that, Ashton unleashes on one, and he like causes a crater to form in its skin, but he notices that it like basically starts to reform. So they like have some sort of healing mechanic, at least to my understanding. So they're like, yeah, this is pretty dangerous. So they're all like, let's probably get out of here. So they're all trying to flee back into the previous room where there was the lion statue and the tiles on the ground that will trigger some sort of trap that they had, thus far avoided. So they're trying to get in the room, but basically F.C.G. and Fern are kind of caught between a rock and a hard place and unable to get to safety. So F.C.G. tries to grappling hook basically over the golems to make it to safety, but he fails, and his grappling hook basically just lands in the other room. So Chetney grabs his grappling hook and basically like fireman like tugs him to like fling F.C.G. and like catches him on his back basically, and then like leaps himself into the other room and like lands on top of the lion statue. And I think he rolled, I don't know if it was like a natural 20, but
it was up there for sure.
Yeah, it was like an insane acrobatics, and I think Matt was like, okay, so you're on a lion, on a werewolf, and it was funny. So then Fern is, I think she actually does roll a natural 20 to just barely avoid like getting grabbed by the golems, as she does make her way to the rest of the party as well. So then they're like, okay, let's peace on out of here. So they go for the door and it won't budge, and come to find out the verdict, the other group has used Hell's immovable rod against them and has essentially locked them in this room. So now the party's freaking out because they did not expect this. They've got the golems here. They're in the trapped room, and they're basically just locked in here.
This was like the best moment of the episode, where they were like, let's get out, let's get out, let's get out. And then they realized they couldn't. And Matt just smiled, and Travis was like, no! It was so good.
It really was amazing. And so they're freaking out, and Imogen basically makes the first move, and she misty steps back across the room past the golems to the other side of the earring chamber, where there's more rooms that they haven't checked out. So she goes back there, opens a door, and in this room there is another lion statue, so presumably more trapped tiles. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to use my action to look for the trapped tiles in this room, but she rolls poorly and basically doesn't see anything. So while this is happening, the rest of the party is like, I guess we have to deal with these golems. And so they start attacking the golems. But while this is happening, Laudna gets out the magnets that they purchased and gives some to F.C.G. And he fashions, or not really fashions, he just uses the magnets to get the earring, and then like magnetizes that to the roof of his mouth, kind of like to hide it from the verdict and make sure that they can get it out of here safely, hopefully. So he does that. They keep working on the golems. They eventually are able to take both of them out. It is a rough fight, though. Nothing too crazy mechanically, or anybody didn't pull any insano moves or anything. Just typical attacks, and eventually get them down. So then they're pretty worn out at this point, and the verdict is breathing down their necks. They clearly have locked them in that other room, so they're close. So they're like, what do we do? So they decide to go in one of these adjacent rooms from the earring chamber and basically close the door behind them and just kind of regroup, take a rest, and try to figure out their next move. And Imogen basically comes to the realization that, hey, I can activate those trap tiles from in here using my telekinesis. So how about we just chill in this room, like effectively try to take a short rest, and if I hear them come into that room, I'll trigger the trap. And they're like, okay, I mean, that works for us. And so they start their short rest, and about 10 minutes in, they hear the verdict enter the adjacent room. So Imogen activates the trap, and all they can hear is like the stone on stone of that statue moving, and then like the blaze of fire, and they can hear screams and basically heat emanating from the door.
Oh my
And
gosh.
then the screams go silent. And excuse me. So while that's happening, Chetney and Orem like brace the door because the verdict are trying to get through to get out of this trap, but they successfully hold the door shut so that they are stuck in there. So the screams go silent. And then Imogen triggers the trap again. And so now there's more screaming, and the door is actually beginning to catch fire. The screaming stops again, and they hear Sevros is down, called out from the other side. So then they wait a bit, and they kind of hear from the other room what seems to be them dragging or tossing the unconscious person out of the room. And once that happens, Imogen triggers the trap a third time, and it's just, more hellfire again, and then there's silence. So they wait a tick, and then Orem opens the door, and it just falls off its hinges. And inside, there's no bodies, and the entire room is just like scorched earth. This is clearly the first time these traps have ever been sprung, because you can see the char everywhere. And there is the table's on fire in the room, and there's like this streak of what'd you call it, like soot that has been dragged across the floor, and clearly it's been the verdict dragging like an additional body out of this room. So the party basically kind of investigates further, and they come to find in the next room Hutchin, the Dragonborn, and the Goblin of the verdict are both unconscious, with the Furbolg, I think, kind of looking over them. And two other members of the verdict are hiding in this room, yet to be revealed. But F.C.G comes in and is like, hey, I'm here to help. Cast Spare the Dying on both of the unconscious people. And they're basically like, let's kind of have a peace treaty right now. Let's have a truce. This place is messed up. I think all of us got more than we bargained for. And, let's just, peace treaty. And since F.C.G is actually, spare the dying, and I think Fern actually cure wounds on Hutchin, the verdict seemed to, believe them. And so there is a bit of peace. And the verdict asks if the Bell's Hells were successful, and Laudna lies and rolls a deception check and says that they're not yet. And so they're like, well, then why are you leaving? And they say, we still have stuff to do. So it's not entirely sure. It's not entirely clear, rather, if the verdict believed them. But again, there is this truce happening. And so they're like, okay, we still have we're going to take a moment to collect ourselves, but, y'all go ahead. So the Bell's Hells exit, and now they're in the journal room, and they're kind of looking at it to see how it's trapped. And they do seem to find that there is some trap mechanic on it, but Chetney is able to swipe it with a very deft sleight of hand. I think he rolls a 25, which Matt says was the exact DC. Right. So he snags the journal, and then they keep backtracking, and he looks for his ever-smoking bottle that he threw, but that is gone. And they're back in the Hishari cult room, and Ashton actually takes one of the helmets of the sets of armor, and Orem makes a history check and basically is, oh yeah, you're familiar with the Hishari. They were this commune around this cult leader. He's very charismatic, but the town was decimated.
They dated like a few decades earlier too, which was interesting.
Yeah. And he's basically like, it was just a cautionary tale. And then as they're making their way out, they're basically reminded of the extra bounty from Hexam that was like, if we sufficiently embarrass him, we can make even more money. And on this note, Ashton is pissed. Ashton's like, this is more than we bargained for. This is more than we were told. Like, I want to embarrass this guy. Like, let's fuck him up. Let's steal some shit of his shit. You know, like, he's just mad and wants to do something. So they ultimately decide to go back up to the living quarters and see what they can find up there. So they make their way to Hydroga's office, and there is a locked drawer that the verdict had tried to get into but couldn't. Like, this is a very sophisticated lock, and they weren't able to pick it. So Ashton tries, and he is able to get it. I don't know if it was a natural 20 or just
it was a crazy high roll.
Yeah, I remember that. It was crazy high, and it was like, yeah, you spite lockpick this. And
right.
So he gets in there and basically takes everything inside, which was a stack of papers and these glasses. So after they've stolen all of that, they make their way back out of the manor, and I think they exit through that kitchen door toward the back, and then they're like, okay, let's head toward the front and, you know, put an end to this thing. And that's basically where it goes to break. Yeah. If you want to take it from there.
Yeah. So after break, Hydroga's there waiting for them and is a bit suspicious that, and they're pretty much like, hey, we have the earring, we did it. And he's like, really? Like, kind of thrown and surprised that this group was successful.
Yeah.
Sure enough, F.C.G, who's been talking with like a lisp this whole time because of the earring in his mouth, you know, kind of overly exaggeratively describes going, you know, pulling it out and giving it to Hydroga. And then they have basically just a conversation of this funny back and forth where Hydroga actually says, like, I didn't expect you to be successful. Guards, kill them. And everyone's like, ah! And he's like, I'm just kidding. And he's like, you know, even though I'm disappointed, you guys were successful. Congratulations. Actually, in kind of like if you've ever been to like Disney World where you go on a ride and they snap your picture, there was kind of like that kind of moment where he takes them into the foyer with the two statues with the rugs on it. And Hydroga's kind of like, oh man, I have a lot of cleanup to do. And basically there's a painting that he points them to that effectively has snapped the party's goofy expressions as like the winning party. And it's almost sort of like implied like this first annual heist has, you know, here's the winning group.
Yeah.
But Hydroga clearly plans to use it for like museum marketing, so to speak. And then the party asks like, what's going to happen to the verdict? And he's like, they will be dealt with. And everyone's kind of quiet. And he's like, I'm just joking. We're a museum. You know, it's fine. All that to say, the party decides, you know, we were successful. We got it. Let's get on out of here. So the party leaves, and as they've left, I don't know if you mentioned this, but they had stolen the book from the mage's name.
Yeah, Vespin
Chloris.
Mm-hmm.
And they had stolen the helmet, the stack of papers, and they start talking. They're like, should we really go back to our tavern, like our inn? Because we don't really want Hydroga to know where we are. And then also we know the verdict was staying there as well. We don't really want them to know where we are.
Right.
So the party decides, you know what, let's go get our horses at like 3 a.m. Let's just go camp outside of town. And they do that with pretty relative ease. It's really no big deal. They go out, they camp. In the morning, Imogen does prestidigitation on everyone because everyone just looks wrecked. F.C.G is like, hey, Imogen, do you want me to cure your blueness? And she's like, yeah, sure. So he cures it. And then he doubles that with, I'm just going to make sure it worked. And he does detect thoughts. And he says, I want to go as deep as I can. Now, if you remember from previous episodes, they've had sort of like this back and forth, this mind meld. But Imogen resists it, casts a 19, beats him out, and basically says, like, what you doing there, F.C.G? And even then adds on to that, like, don't do that ever again. Have a smiley day. And F.C.G's like, that's my line. And then this is probably a little bit out of order, but he does identify the goggles at some point. And they are goggles. I can't remember what he called them, but basically they allow you to cast Charm Person on the person you're looking at through the goggles.
Yeah.
He also, at a later day, because the party's eventually going to head back to Dressar, he's going to cast Identify on the stack of papers and realize basically that these papers, which, by the way, are invisible, you can't see any print on the text is invisible. And Ashton even has this cool moment where he tries to rip it and it doesn't tear, and they realize it's enchanted. So that's why F.C.G identifies it. And they realize that it's only susceptible to cold to see the text. But we'll come back to that in a second. Everyone else is kind of looking at the trinkets they've picked up. Chetney is looking at the journal of Vespin Chloris and kind of like eagerly reading it. Lada is kind of over his shoulder, like, what does it say?
Yeah.
And as they look more into it, it starts to get a bit, Matt calls it derivative. It's kind of like the writing, like the person kind of loses, it almost seems like the writer kind of lost interest as they were writing through. And then they start to notice something, the ... And it's in that moment that they're like, no. And they realize this is not the journal of Vespin Chloris. This is a fake that Hydroga presumably crafted himself, wrote himself, and the whole museum's basically a sham. Chetney's super disappointed. He throws the journal into a swamp, which Laudna retrieves for fun activities when they're bored.
Yeah, and he even does the rip test, and it does rip.
That's right.
So that's
and
like how they
rip.
know.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. Otherwise, the party's like, hey, let's kind of finish things up. Let's go by Siastani. Let's go to the toy maker shop. And then let's skip town and get back to Dressar because our mission is done. And they even send a message back to Gianna Hexen saying, hey, we were successful. We did it. And she's like, great job. You did it. So Chetney and Orem decide to head to Not Forgotten, the toy maker shop. And because this is where the toy maker previously, the old woman had mentioned a collaborator she had appeared named Ultgar, who Chetney knows of. And so he wants to follow up on that loose end. So they go in, they're kind of perusing the shop. And she's like this nice, sweet old lady. And then Chetney starts striking up a conversation. He's like, where are you from? And she's like, I'm from Uthadurn. And he's like, you ever get back there? And she's like, no, not really. And he's like, you ever met someone named Ultgar? And like the vibe totally changes. She's like, why do you ask? And Matt talks about how it's like this Wild West moment where like Chetney like reaches down for his chisel, and then Matt says that this woman Zadro, it reaches down for her chisel, and it's this very tense moment where she's like, are you friend or foe of Ultgar? And he's like, I'm not a friend of him at all. She's like, that's good. And they don't really gain any new information other than they both sort of simultaneously agree that Ultgar is a terrible person. And that's pretty much that. In fact, as Chetney's leaving, Orem's like, what the heck was that? What was that? Because it was like so awkwardly tense all of a sudden. And then Chetney basically is like, Ultgar is the worst. He's literally the worst. And talks about how he abandoned the woodcrafting profession and, is basically a big traitor for that. The party also decides to check on Astani. And so Astani's like kind of old man wandering, like eating bread. And there is this moment where Astani kind of oddly asks, like, oh, are you guys leaving? Orem does an insight check and actually gets a whisper from Matt, something going on there that he picks up from Astani.
Yeah, well, I think it's because they weren't going to see him and they were just leaving. And so Matt had Astani be there and was like, come and talk to them.
Yeah. He was kind of awkwardly waiting on the path, so to speak, I guess. Yeah. So Astani actually offers, hey, I'll walk you out of town. Mm-hmm. That's kind of why they're walking together. And in sort of like this hushed, like keep this between us, basically talks about how if they're going to go check out the Omen archive, if they're going to go follow that path on what happened to the Loomis twins, you need to know that the Loomis twins had joined this. I'm trying to think of the best way to describe it. It's like it's an organization that invests itself into researching and discovering like artifacts and sort of like old ancient history. And Astani describes it as it's really grown in recent years and it's become something more than just like a hobbyist type function.
Yeah.
But basically implies that the reason that they were killed is likely because they had somehow like poked their nose where it didn't belong within this group. And basically says, hey, if you do head to EOS, look for Eben Kai, a professor at the seminary, and actually gives them a note that says this will vet you guys for her. the party then decides, okay, let's get out of town. Let's head on our way. And they travel pretty much without any issues. This is also when they get the identify on the goggles. It's when they do the identify on the papers to realize that the frost damage shows the font. So Lana does, frost damage on it, and they start going through the papers. And there's a few different things. One of them is a purchase order for what seems to be some kind of object, and they realize it was the relic, one of the objects in the museum rooms.
Yeah.
Which is further evidence that this museum is actually a bunch of duplicates. It's a bunch of just fake things. So there's that. There's also random notes where Hydroga's clearly been keeping tabs on Gianna Hexam, trying to figure out what she's doing, what are her dealings. Mentions that there are these small boxes that she seems to be picking up on about a 3-month cadence, but it's not clear what they are, but these individual boxes. And Maddox, she mentions that Ashton with the nobodies, whenever they broke in, would have remembered seeing this box before, getting blitzed in the back of the head. And then also there's this name that keeps popping up in the notes, and it's a very particular abbreviation, like a codified abbreviation, sp.y.sh-n. And basically, I think someone, maybe it was Orem, does a history check and rolls extremely high. And the SP, the start of it, he basically says, this to be likely, I think he said spiraling shin.
Yeah.
He said he didn't know the middle initials. And then I don't remember what the last one was either. I don't know if you remember.
I took it to mean the entirety of it was spiraling shin.
Okay. Yeah. And I think he even said it was almost like a signature, like a notable, you would have seen this to know it meant that. Other than that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else that happened. They do have a discussion as they're getting back to town. They're pretty impressed that the horses are alive. They're like, man, yeah, well, should we? I think someone even jokes should we kill it anyway? And it's around this time that F.C.G. kind of retorts back well, it doesn't really matter, they don't have souls. And there's this very mini discussion or debate on do the horses have souls, are they anyway, it's just a funny conversation, I guess. The party does level up to level 6, and what else am I missing?
I think that was pretty much it.
Yeah, so the party levels up to 6, they do their HP rolls. And that is what happened on episode 21 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role.
Pop, pop.
Yeah. So I feel like there was something I missed there at the end, but I can't remember.
I don't think so, but maybe.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just go ahead and get it out there. I love the episode. I know you probably loved it too.
Yeah. It was just fun, There was
yeah.
We got the big conclusion to the heist, and it was touch and go there for a minute. Especially with Ashley gone. I know that they still had Fern, but it's still kind of tough to be missing, a main player during a very dangerous encounter like that. Because I'm sure Laura's not as good at wielding Fern, know. So
right. I will go and say Ashley is one of my all-time favorites, but in Laura's defense, Ashley isn't too versed in her own class. So
that's true.
Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Laura's Fern impressions were killing me. They were. Oh yeah, everyone's were really. It was great.
It's funny. With my joke about her knowing her class, last episode you joked about how the party is abysmally unaware of the lore.
Yeah,
there were some discussions in here. Maybe it was Spiraling Shin, where it was something where F.C.G. or Sam Riegel was someone tell me what this means. I don't read the comic books.
Yeah, exactly.
What is this? Because people were reacting, and he was what is this?
Yeah, so. I think he said I don't read the comics. What is that? But yeah, that's my point exactly on how the hell did they all know who Vespin Chloris was. There's definitely something going on there. But yeah, fun episode. And I'm interested once they left Drusar, it's not as if we thought they'd never go back, but I honestly didn't see them going back this quickly. So it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, and I think they even floated the idea of like, do we go to EOS? And I think maybe I'm even just making this up, but I feel like the understood thing was like that might be maybe a little bit long down the road rather than it might be too much for us to go straight there. It feels like we have some business in Dressar still. I feel like there was something like that, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe I was just thinking to myself. I don't know.
I know. I mean, they obviously have Drusar, and then who knows what could happen from there. But it seems like EOS is the next thing. I don't know what the next thing would be if not that. Again, unless it's just something new that happens to pop up. Maybe some Ultgar stuff. I mean, we'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But yeah, it'll just be interesting to see kind of. I mean, I guess they've only been gone for a couple weeks max, but it'll be interesting to see how those threads have unfurled in their absence with the whole Treshy and the Shade Mother and just all the political machinations of Drusar. What we get from there.
This was a good break from Dressar. I mentioned this when we talked about Dressar, like it feels weird to leave without like some loose ends wrapped up. And I feel like we got that really well for them to be able to leave. But I said this last episode, it's great when you have quote filler, which is not fair to call it filler because we have no concept of the entire story. I'm just, having
for lack of a better word.
Yeah, having side quests, I guess. But it still feels full of direction. It still feels really fun to watch. And the whole heist, I mean, we were really excited about it on the front end, and in hindsight, it was really fulfilling to watch and enjoy. And even the party, as they were wrapping up, heading back to Dressar, out of character, they were like, "Matt, that was really awesome. That was really fun."
Yeah, and even as, again, for lack of a better word, a side quest, we got a lot of interesting stuff because we got a lot of potential stuff on Imogen's backstory via the Loomis twins and all of that, and Orum's, I guess. Chetney, obviously, because of Oldgar, and then also Ashton with this Hishari armor and just there's just lots of interesting seeds that are being harvested.
Was something said about the voice of the Tempest, by the way, this episode, or
briefly?
What was said?
Are you talking about when they were looking at the papers?
Yeah, was there something about like a connection with the voice of the Tempest? Like, had the voice of the Tempest done work with the Spiraling Shin? Is that a person, by the way?
Yes.
Or is that an organization? Okay,
it's a person.
Okay.
So I think so. And again, y'all below correct us if we're wrong here, but I think Orum brought it up because he was the one that made that check to realize that those initials meant Spiraling Shin, right? And I think he said that Spiraling Shin had approached Keyleth with some sort of deal or offer or insert whatever. Like they had met for some purpose to maybe negotiate something or something to that effect, and that's why he was familiar with that name.
Okay, interesting.
I don't think we got any more context. Like even if a deal was made or wasn't made, I think he just said that like there was a deal at some point. So
yeah, and who or who's Spiraling Shin?
Okay, so this was a character from campaign 1, and try to give without spoilers for anybody, that not that these are big ones, but just spoiler policy, gonna try to be vague. But essentially what he is a member of this thieves guild, this the Clasp. I think we've talked about this before. And at one point during campaign 1, he offered Vox Machina like a deal, and they turned it down. But that's pretty much the only like on-screen time he got. But he's essentially like an influential spy master kind of type person, if you will. So probably trades in secrets and does that type of thing. So kind of makes sense that his name would be on those papers. But then he would be dealing with Keyleth about is an interesting question.
Yeah. Is it implied that he like Hydroga's like his keeping tabs on Hexam, is that through Spiraling Shin, like with his name popping up? Like, was it correspondence with that person, or was he observing that Gianna Hexam, in doing like these shady, backwater illegal trade deals for these boxes, was collaborating with Spiraling Shin?
So I'm trying to parse that together too. So there were 3 notes, right, that they found. One was
the work order,
the work order
that confirms that stuff's fake,
right,
basically.
and there was the Hexam.
The notes, the notes on Hexam in the boxes she was receiving.
And then the third one was Spiraling Shin.
The third one was just that his abbreviation, his signature, I guess, was popping up thematically, like over and over again throughout the papers.
Okay, so it wasn't like a third separate note that was the Spiraling Shin note.
I don't think so. I think Matt's phrasing was like, you keep seeing this popping up. Like, this is because they were looking for like what stands out. And he's like, you keep seeing this abbreviation.
So really there were maybe 2 subjects. The fake items and Gianna Hexam.
Okay. Yeah, I think so.
So I think that Spiraling Shin was maybe the one providing this intel on Gianna Hexam. Now, was he the one personally spying on her? Probably not, but he has a network, and perhaps is just signed off on, like, Hytroga maybe hired the clasp, or I don't know if Spiraling Shin still works for them necessarily, but hired Spiraling Shin to get him this intel, and that's why his signature was on it or whatever. It's my best guess.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too. So are the clasp, are they good, evil, neutral?
I mean,
mercenaries?
they're not good. They're definitely not good, but I wouldn't know. Maybe not fair to call them straight evil. They're like kind of like a cartel. They're probably trafficking drugs and doing other types of stuff, but every city has a seedy underbelly, I guess. So I don't know. And not to bring in EXU, but the nameless ones from EXU are kind of like, they're trying to like usurp the clasp and the Myriad, which were like the 2 rival gangs, for lack of a better word. So I mean, probably more evil than good, but I don't know if it's fair to call them completely evil.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, well, I wondered if the dealing between Spiraling Shin and Keyleth was somehow the connector to the Loomis twins, because that's been the fuzzy detail, is like, how does this character in Tal'Dorei link back to these things that are happening in Marquette? And so maybe there is albeit maybe stretched connection, but maybe that's at least seems to be the first connection between these 2 continents and these 2 parties that we've seen. I guess, or actually, to be fair though, you talked about how the Ashari and Keyleth, like, her job is to keep an eye on the conjunction of spheres.
The elemental planes.
I guess that's actually the more obvious connection now that I think about it. But
well, it's still a very interesting connection. But I guess it's fair, like in D&D, if your player makes a history check, it's nice to come up with a rational reason why they would know that. So it's possible that was just a throwaway line to explain how Orym knew Spiraling Shin. Like, oh yeah, he and Keyleth talked one time. So like maybe that's pointing at, oh shit, like what did they talk about? What was the deal? Or maybe it's just, this is the rationalization for why I know this, and there is no underlying meaning to it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
But definitely, I'm curious if it is the former, what those 2 characters would have been talking about. But I mean, I guess, if you're the head of state, you probably got some spy masters you're talking to.
Yeah. And sort of like, even there's probably plenty of ends justify the means type situations, for the good of your people in Tal'Dorei and what have you. So,
yeah. And I mean, I guess while we're on the notes, let's just talk about all of that section. So he was spying on Hexam, which makes sense. They're kind of like these rivals, right? But that is kind of a step that maybe is beyond just a normal friendly rivalry to be like tracking someone's every movement.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
so I
for
wonder.
sure. Way beyond just like, yeah, a friendly rivalry. Like this is a extremely interested person.
Yeah, and I wonder if like, we talked about how the traps in this museum was kind of played off as it's all harmless. Harmless maybe wasn't the word that was used, but not like lethal. Like nobody expected they might die on this heist, and yet that was entirely possible. So I wonder if he was trying to kill his rivals' teams of people. Like maybe that was his intent to kill the Verdict and Bell's Hells, and
Yeah, I mean the party was, I mean Ashton specifically was pretty pissed off about it. Was like this isn't what we were told basically. Like, this is way over the top. So yeah, you maybe you're right. I mean maybe it was, not just to um not just to beat Gianna Hexam as in like, look, see, you couldn't have stolen it, but to also, effectively neuter her, getting
yeah,
rid of her troop. Um, yeah, I don't know. I am very suspicious. I mean, Hydroga definitely played it off and was being, bantering and, being silly, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's something nefarious under that coat of humor.
yeah,
So,
and kind of on not on that same note, but what's interesting is if he wasn't straight up trying to kill them just like for his own selfish purposes, but maybe Gianna was also kind of in on it, but that doesn't really check out to me. But I still feel like it's worth positing out there, because there was some line about like when the party were talking to him and they were like, "Yeah, that was a little bit more intense than you
mhm.
led on to be." He made some comment about like, "Yeah, I beefed up the additions after speaking to Gianna." And I thought that was interesting. Like, did she tell him to, or was he just saying that like, oh, after they friendly bantered about it, he's like, oh god, I'm gonna make this even harder, type
I
of
kind
thing.
of treated it as like, maybe Gianna was, talking trash to him and he was kind of like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then like, behind the scenes, it's like, it
Yeah.
reminds me of a totally random example, but a guy who was doing like a food challenge at a restaurant and was like talking back and forth with the restaurant. And there was all this publicity around it and was really basically talking smack to the restaurant. And then when he got there, the restaurant had basically like doubled the portion size to see if he could actually eat it. And then there was all this drama after the fact because, it wasn't even their actual plate. Like they did it and they're like, yeah, we beefed it up for the competition. And, obviously he's really miffed about it. So that's kind of where my mind went was, he's talking to Gianna Hexam and she's like, yeah, I got a great party. Like, watch out. And he's like, okay. And then he's, installing all these death traps.
Yeah. See,
So,
I'm team that as well. I don't feel like if Gianna wanted to off Ashton, this wouldn't be how she'd do it. Like she's had plenty of opportunities to deal with him. Like she's given
right.
him this second chance. So that didn't check out to me, but I did think it was at worst. It was at least worth mentioning, just because that was kind of a
Yeah.
shady line.
What do you think's in the box? What's in the
Bro,
box?
I don't know. It's the part Matt brought up obviously is the most interesting part, is that Ashton looked in that box during the heist, and that's when everything got weird for him, and he basically doesn't remember anything else.
Right.
So that just made me question so many things. Like we know that he got, at least the story we're told is that he was like blasted from behind by something and then
Right.
took a big spill and out of the window or whatever.
Right.
So was it something in the box that actually blasted him, or was it because he was looking in the box that maybe Gianna or somebody there was like, what the hell are you doing, and blasted him
Right.
for looking in it? And does he not remember because of his accident, or does he not remember because of something that was in that box? Like, I don't know. Were we told where the box was from? Like where, like, because
Wildmount?
she got these shipments. Okay, yeah. I was gonna ask. So we
Yeah, I can't
did.
remember if he said it was specifically from Wildmount or if he said like shipments were from all over, including Wildmount. I don't remember honestly.
I'm trying to look at my notes because or wait, here I am. I found it. Yeah, dealings with outside dealers in Wildmount.
Okay, yeah.
So now this is a stretch, but so Wildmount was a big setting in campaign 2, and there's some interesting magic that basically originates in that area. So I wonder if we're dealing with like some dunamancy, which is a school of magic, which kind of deals with weird timey-wimey and stuff like that. So maybe there's like some weird dunamantic artifacts in that crate, and him opening it like messed things up. That's a big old stretch, but
Yeah, okay.
I don't know, something clearly is going on with it, and it's clearly important, but she's seemingly just a middleman, right? She's just receiving it, and then someone else is getting it, like from
I
her,
think
right?
we don't know. I think like Hydroga's notes, like like is almost like, he's airing his thoughts out on like is like asking the question, is Hexam a middleman type
Oh
person,
yeah, you're right.
or is it going directly to her? And so I think we don't really know. That's a great question. Is she a middleman for someone else, or does she have her own? Because think about it, if Hydroga has his museum of things that he's collecting, I say collecting, he's forging. It seems to make sense that Hexam would have her own things. We know she was
Yeah,
trying to get the golem
right,
that was stolen from her. Again, was that going to someone else? I don't know, but it seems like she's a collector in her own right, though it's not clear what
right. And she's obviously
or for
very
what purpose.
wealthy
Right,
and influential. Maybe this is part of how she has that wealth, because she's playing whatever role this is for whoever it is.
right.
And then there's no reason to make this connection, but I wondered if it at all was related to the broomstone smuggling that we got the hints of at the very start of the campaign. It didn't seem to be the same, because there was just brimstone smuggled into those larger containers that were in the warehouse or whatever.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really seem like the same situation, but
I think that's my mind's pretty clearly placed that on Armand Tresci, who she hates.
but does she really hate him?
Does she? Good point. Who knows?
But yeah,
Yeah. Speaking of hating someone, Ultgar, that was a great scene.
bro, that was so good. That was
Yeah.
so good. Matt and Travis both killed it, and it was Orem just being there, like the awkward, like, oh god, my like your friend's parents are having an argument
Yeah.
or something, and I don't know if we'll ever make it to campaign 3 being an animated show, but I'm ready for that scene because I think it'll be hilarious.
Yeah. So, clearly, I mean, it's funny how she described Ultgar previously of like, yeah, it's this guy I used to work with. He bounced, whatever. And yet when Chetney is bringing him up, um, there is a very clear animosity against Ultgar for both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes me wonder who this fellow is. Chetney's obviously really unhappy with Ultgar. It actually made me wonder if Ultgar was somehow connected to Chetney's transformation, getting bit. Not necessarily that Ultgar was responsible for it, but it, it could be like knowing Chetney that he just is so proud of his craft that when someone who was also in the craft chooses to leave it, there's some really hard feelings there. I could see that, but it seems more backstory related than that. But
Yeah,
I don't know.
it seems more serious than that to me as well, just because they're both like he is the worst person. So I mean, if that was just building up to a joke of like he started using metals instead of
Yeah,
wood, I feel like that would be
yeah,
kind of cheap. But
yeah.
I wouldn't say it's in the realm of impossibility that that's what he's setting up. But yeah, and to take a couple steps back really quick, I too was curious, and I was wondering if I even misinterpreted the earlier episode, because to my understanding, when I forgot who was there, but whoever came to the toy shop the first time,
Hmm.
they were told that some of this stuff was made by a guy who used to work here,
Right,
Ultgar, right?
right, right.
So then I was very confused when this conversation with Chetney and what do you remember her name?
Zadro, I think.
Zadro. She was like, "Oh, I used to be from Uthodurn," which is where Chetney was, and presumably that's where Ultgar was, at least at some point. And so it seemed like they both like knew Ultgar from then, and they both like
Mhm.
fled Ultgar and they hate him now. So it's just weird to me that she would have worked with him here and like he used to work here. Like so their
Yeah.
falling out happened at this toy store, whereas Chetney's falling out with him happened back in Uthadurn.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it a couple of ways. Like she worked with him in Uthadurn and then brought like the supply over to Marquette,
Oh,
or to wherever they are now.
that makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, but also it makes sense to me the other way, where it's like he did come here and they worked together, and just the references to Uthadurn clued Zadro in that this isn't just like an average customer. This is someone who knows Oldgar, which is why she was so cutting like
Mm,
immediately after that of like, how do you know him? Actually, it's because actually that he name drops Oldgar,
right.
whereas in the previous scene, she's the one who brings him up. So it's like, oh, these are just average random customers. In the case of Chetney, here's someone coming in mentioning Oldgar. Okay, hang on, what's going on here? And so it does make sense to me, but I am curious as to the backstory there. Was it in Uthadurn? Was it in the Heartmore Hamlet? So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I think either explanation is possible, but you at least I like what you said because that at least makes it make sense for me. Because while it is possible they both came to the Heartmore together, that just doesn't seem. That just I don't like that as much, which that'll probably be what it is. But
It is odd if she hates him so much that she would keep his stuff.
yeah,
But I mean, to get like more of his product out there. But I guess hey, if you're a business owner, you're not turning away your supply. So,
yeah,
but
and to me it makes. And there's no reason for this, but it just makes more sense. The whole like you ever get back to Uthadurn? And she's like, no. Because to me, that's like, because I'm trying to get away from him.
yeah,
That's how that makes sense to me. So I like that maybe she just still had some of his stuff and was trying to sell it. But what is going on? Why they both hate him? Like they were both
right,
ready to like fight to the death, presumably.
right.
So like, what? I mean, we talked about maybe it's because he disgraced the wooden craft or something. But if it's not that, like, what is he doing? Is like seems like maybe an abusive like shop owner, or like if they apprenticed under him and he does some dark stuff, or maybe he has gotten away from woodworking, but it's not as like a punchline as like, oh, now he uses tin, but maybe it's like he started crafting some dark shit. Like maybe he's using his skills
Yeah, I
for
mean,
nefarious purposes.
I think it's fair to say this person's probably evil. But the impression I got wasn't so much that like, hey, there's some real trauma there. Like this is like an evil dude. More like this dude sucks. Like I'm just letting you know this dude sucks. And so I put in my mind evil, but also like huge, probably narcissist, like just a terrible douche. And so
Okay.
that's kind of the route I'm going. Is like both of them have worked with this guy. He probably stole from them, probably threw them under the bus. Just an awful. I mean, we all have that person in our life that we're like, I think that person sucks. It's just that's where my mind goes. Is like that person sucks, and I assume that's the same for them. Is yeah, we met him, and we are much worse off having met him. But not saying, not dissuading you from thinking that he's doing dark stuff or evil stuff, because I think also probably going to be there's going to be some encounter at some point with Ultgar, an actual encounter maybe. Um, so I think it's both in my mind.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that you don't think it's trauma, because I feel like there was some trauma with how they were both
I say
reacting.
trauma as in like I don't. Yeah, I mean, following through with that, I don't think that they were like abused by Ulgar, like Ulgar like tried to kill them, for example. But maybe, I mean, they were both ready to fight. They're both ready to fight at the reference of him. So maybe it actually is that. I don't know. So
There's definitely something interesting going on there, and I'm excited to find out more. And
yeah.
just a little like not really above the table, but kind of above the table. Um, we know that Chetney is based on chutney. That's kind of where Travis got the inspiration, which is a a Christmas themed one shot. Um, so you know, I without spoiling the one shot, you guys definitely got to watch it. But uh, Chutney was like an elf that made toys for Santa, and clearly Chetney is essentially a toy maker that make toys for Ultgar. So maybe Ultgar is kind of like the Santa relationship, but I know that for those of you that watched Four Sided Dive, their like talk show, one thing Matt brought up is that like when they were making the characters and stuff, and Travis was talking about kind of remorphing Chutney into Chetney, he was like, I am not making Santa canon. So like it's not gonna end up being literally Santa. I know some people have been like throwing that out there, but Matt just made that pretty clear that he's like, I'm not bringing that into the canon. Like this is Exandria is its own thing. That was just a fun Christmas one shot. But it is still interesting to kind of like extrapolate the relationship and wonder if it's like a similar thing happening there.
Well, yeah, because I mean, stories. I mean, I think this is how Matt does it. It's how I've typically done it. But like backstories and like future story points are kind of collaboratively created with the player. Not future story points, like, but it's based off of those original conversations of like, what's your backstory, who are important people. And not that it's like fully fleshed out, but I'm assuming there are at least some breadcrumbs, like some important details that like they collaboratively figure out. And then Matt just takes it and runs with it. So,
yeah,
I think I'm assuming Chetney knows like what has happened in his past with Ultgar. I don't think that Travis is just playing off of like, oh yeah, Ultgar sucks, but I have no idea who he is or what he did. But I guess that is possible. But
no, I think
I don't know where I'm going
I
with
think
this,
he at
but
least knows why he hates him, but he might not know like the machinations of what Ulgar's been working
right.
towards or is doing. But I'm sure he does have his own reasons for why that relationship soured, and that's not
Right.
just something Matt came up with. That's he'll reveal to him or something. But yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it is very curious. I think for my money, it's something darker than just a toy making joke. So
He broke my chisel. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm excited to see. And I mean, seemingly, when he first told us he was fired, but clearly I don't think that's the case. I feel like he left because he didn't agree with whatever was happening. And I feel like so did Zadro, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah. What else from
so
episode?
the Grim Verity.
Yeah, okay.
That was super cool name. Just
yeah. I know. I was actually thinking, I was like, dang, that's a good name. I need to steal that. Yeah.
But I can give a quick like recap of it and then we can talk about it.
Yeah.
But so this was this organization that the Loomis twins were a part of. And as Astani described it, it was this collective of collegiate scholars that dated back about 100 years that evolved from underclassmen debating theory. And then that just became more. And what they did was like uncovered conspiratorial secrets of history to a borderline blasphemous degree. And Astani said he was briefly a member. And because of that, like they draw the ire of a lot of people / organizations, because if they're out here, disproving conspiracies, if you will, like that's gonna make some people mad. So clearly whatever they were researching about Ruidus and stuff had just drawn the ire of some unknown entity that got them killed. But yeah, I just thought this group was super cool. It's like there's not really a good one-to-one comparison, but kind of like, like secret detectives that are, uncovering dark secrets of the world or something. I don't know. Like,
I took kind of like a cult implication from it.
Oh, you think it's like a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think because doesn't Astani basically say like he tried to like when the Loomis twins mentioned they become members, he was kind of like, ooh, I don't know about that. Like, I don't know if I would. Like, wasn't he trying to like dissuade them or?
It's possible. I thought he was just like trying to warn them not
Oh,
to go poking their nose
yeah,
where they
okay.
might draw heat. But it could be what you're saying. I'm actually not
As I
sure.
was watching, I thought it was like these people have become so obsessed. Like it went from like, hey, let's talk history, let's talk like some of these artifacts, to now being so like obsessive. And I think that, to me, that's also why Astani left, because he was a member at one point,
Right.
and then either he said like it was, those are beyond his days now or something. But so he left, and I thought he was saying, for the Loomis twins, hey, like this group is intense, so be careful. But it also works the way you just communicated. Like this group, because they expose, they find these they have found these conspiratorial links that maybe simply by association, he was saying, hey, by having your name as on the member list, you are in trouble.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I could see I'm 70-30 with the former versus the latter, but I don't know.
I think it could be both, right? Like maybe both are true. Like maybe it is, and maybe that like the Grim Verite has kind of become cultish, and maybe they're not, purely, moral and paragons of justice. They might have their, they might be shady as well. But I do think that the Grim Verite is definitely going to be drawing regardless of their morality, is going to be drawing the ire of the people they're like exposing, right? So I think it could be the heat from both directions, if you will. But yeah, what you said makes sense too. And I mean, clearly Istani did say he used to be a member, so we don't really know why he stopped. Could be because it was getting kind of dark, or they're kind of obsessed and crazy, or who knows. But that organization is just cool to me. I like the thought of that being out there in the world.
Yeah, the name's cool for sure too.
But
it also made me wonder if part of me made me wonder also, like, it almost seems like this is kind of a far down the road breadcrumb, like for when they had to EOS. But then on the same token, they're sort of going the same path as the Loomis twins, like poking their nose in this. It makes me wonder if we're gonna get one of these attacks in the near future that killed the Loomis twins. Which I don't know. I'm just curious if we're gonna have that happen in the near future. Maybe that's the impetus that takes them out of Jursar. I don't know. Impetus? How do you say that word?
I think it's impetus. I don't know though.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think you're right. I mean, I feel like that's definitely on the table. I mean, it'll be interesting to see if they've already appeared on anyone's radar. They've really only talked to Istani, and she tried to check out that book, but do they have spies seeing who's checking out books? Maybe. But I think if they go to EOS and the Omen archive, I think that'll get them on the radar 100%. Because I think Istani said like it's when they took such a keen interest in that like I think he even warned them like, hey, like that
makes sense to me.
So I feel like absolutely we could get an attack, especially once they go there, or if / when.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does. I mean, the whole Ruidus plotline just feels like the biggest like story point thus far in the campaign. And I mean, it's on a pretty colossal scale, literally as well, since it's a moon. So maybe we get something that ends up being the even bigger, like overarching campaign story. But if not, it does feel like, well, if that's the next thing we do, we're kind of progressing pretty quickly on the main thread. But I mean, we don't really have the correct perspective to know like what's, maybe this is just step 1 of 75 that needs to happen. But anyway, what I'm rambling about is I agree that it does feel like it's kind of maybe a bit in the future, but we also don't really have too much else to potentially go toward right now. But I mean, that could obviously all change within one episode. So
I agree with you. This feels like the sort of overarching thread. And I do feel like we're eventually heading to being on Ruidus. No, I'm just kidding. But maybe. I don't know. Maybe.
Spelljammer, baby.
I think in like a really nice, like rhythmic way, I think there are some really cool tiebacks to campaign 1 with the solstice that you mentioned. And it feels like we're heading towards a seasonal climax that also it would make sense to also it be tied to all this conversation about Ruidus and being Ruidus touched and all this kind of like lunar-esque conversations that are happening. For me, it is absolutely like the biggest thread and kind of like the overall driving plot line for Exandria as a whole right now.
Yeah, agreed. And I mean,
it ties back well to Exandria Unlimited also.
Yeah.
So.
And it's, excuse me, I think they might go to Ruidus, or at least venture to space, because I mean there's and this is maybe nothing, but the whole, I'm sure you saw the commercials, like the most recent thing D&D has put out is like this new Spelljammer content, and Critical Role even had a little commercial for it. So I mean it would make sense you take the biggest property in the space, Critical Role, and I mean not that Matt is taking like, hey, listening to like I don't know what the word would be, but I'm sure he's not like putting things in the campaign to like promote for people.
I can't think of the phrasing either, but taking cues from
like I'm sure that's not happening.
Coast. Yeah,
but maybe it was just like a marriage of fate that like happened to work out, and there's this new D&D Spelljammer content, and campaign 3 happens to be when
I would imagine there's a lot of cool collaboration that's happening between Matt and that whole team, and
I mean,
Wizards
absolutely.
of the Coast. I think I called them Forgotten Coast. Wizards of the Coast, because even like stuff that's now simultaneously branded. So yeah, I could see it being more of like, hey, this is what we're thinking of. What do you think? And then being like, oh, that's really cool. It should be like, and kind of like swapping notes, and then Matt taking inspiration from that. But I think you're right. I don't take it as, hey, put this in.
Hey, Massa, put in the spaceships.
We're running a special in 2 weeks. Make sure you get this in the next episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a Demogorgon. Like, wait, what?
Speaking of Stranger Things, season 4, they this isn't like a spoiler. You saw the trailer, right?
Yeah.
That like the ominous man creature,
seemingly big bad guy. Yeah.
They revealed that like that's gonna be Vecna, like because the kids call like the monsters things from D&D, like the Demogorgon.
Yeah.
So like
they're
that's Vecna.
Call it Vecna.
I think so. So that's kind of fun.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't really have anywhere else to go with that, but just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah,
all right.
Ruidus feels like the big boy. I mean, I feel like
we're going to the moon.
I think we already briefly mentioned this, but I think our Pixelists canon should be that moon on our thing is Ruidus.
Yeah, of course. We knew all along, guys.
Yep.
That's why we have the moon on here.
That's right.
So we knew since
Foresight.
the start. So, all right. Well, anything else you want to talk about?
I think we hit it all.
Yeah.
What about
great
you?
episode for sure. No, I just saying again, I love the episode as usual.
Yeah. Well, actually, one tiny thing. Actually, I just saw part of my notes. The stuff in the museum. So we know the beacon was fake, which is what one of those notes was about, and then the spear, which was the other thing on that note, and the book is clearly fake. I'm still wondering if that means everything was, though, because my mind still goes back to the Hishari cult mask that pinged as magical when they detected magic, and that just makes me wonder just all about that, especially with the Ashton connection. Like, could that have been real, and is there more?
I was kind of I mean, I like that you said that because I was hoping it was like a fake out, like, oh, everything's a fake, and then something actually is real. And it actually makes me wonder if the Journal of Vespin Chloras might actually be authentic. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the Hishari armor piece could be real. I mean, it seems like why fake it, I guess, especially since it's from such recent times, probably easily acquired, or much easier than other objects. But yeah, I like what you're saying there. Like, not just broad brushing, like everything's a fake, but it's a bit of a red herring, so to speak.
Yeah.
So.
And I mean, they didn't take anything else, so it's not like anything they have is potentially a relic or anything. But I was just wondering about that. Like, for my money, I feel like maybe something was real, and just because I mean,
yeah,
there was only the invoice for 2 of those items, so
true.
Who knows? But that was the last little thing I wanted to throw out there.
What do you want to do for our thumbnail today?
Bro, I actually had an idea, but then I couldn't figure out how to do it.
Okay.
But my idea was going to be to yassify ourselves.
Oh,
but I was like, how would I even do that?
And got on this podcast, so the anti-yassify.
Yeah. So I don't know. You got any ideas?
Yeah, I was thinking something to do with like the lion torch, like. And I loved how they mentioned, because the total vibe I got was from campaign 1, like the shh, go to sleep.
Yeah.
As like they're pounding on the door, and Laura Bailey's like, I don't want to do it again. And Travis is like, hit him again. So like something to do with that whole scene I thought would be good.
Okay.
But I don't know if one of us is like pantomiming on fire.
We could do like one of us trying to hold the door shut and the other person like in agony, like trying to open the door, maybe like pretending the door is the space between us here.
Yeah. Let me figure out my best miming of a door. Which one do you want to be?
It doesn't matter.
I guess you be the agonizer.
Okay.
In flames, and I'll be the. And right, which side, by the way, is the door for me? Over here?
Yeah, but you need to bring your hands more back.
Like here?
Yeah, but now a little further.
Like here?
No, the other way.
This way?
Like, because you're holding the door, right?
Yeah, I was gonna be like holding the knob, like pulling it or
yeah, that works.
Or like, Okay, you ready?
Your hand's a little higher. And then like
make it higher or lower?
No, you were good height wise. Yeah, there you go. Like,
okay. Okay, yeah. Okay.
I couldn't tell if I was positioned correctly, but I'm sure it works well.
Doesn't matter. We got it. All right, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in. We so appreciate it. Don't forget you can follow us on our Twitter at the Pixelists, and we'll have some more content coming to you shortly.
Yeah, and sorry to be the YouTube person, but the best way you can help us is like, comment, and subscribe. So that would be much appreciated.
You know it. So we'll catch you later, guys.
Bye, y'all.
See ya.